Therefore, the radio station itself retains political neutrality, and any political views or comments aired as part of political discussion programming or otherwise are not the views of Listen Lanarkshire, nor of Getting Better Together Limited. The station has a set of key commitments found on the Ofcom website, and we adhere to all necessary Ofcom rules. For more information or inquiries, please contact us at radio@shotshealthyliving.com.
Hello and welcome back to What's the Point? The weather is absolutely miserable, Jerry, so we're hoping tonight's guest can lift our spirits and bring some renewed vigour and optimism. Oh wait, we're talking about Scottish politics. I do apologise. I'm your host, Greg Lennon, community campaigner, occasional chaos coordinator, and probably the only person in North Lanarkshire with a working knowledge of both the Councillor's Code of Conduct and the correct procedure for submitting motions in North Lanarkshire Council. Kenny, we know you're listening and watching. I do, however, digress slightly. Tonight, we've got a belter of a lineup, Jerry. First up,
wow,
joining us in the studio is someone who needs no introduction in the world of Scottish journalism, but we'll give her one anyway. It is Hannah Rodger, Chief Political Editor at the Sunday Mail, award-winning investigative journalist, and the only person we know who could dismantle a politician's statement with nothing more than a raised eyebrow and a looming deadline. If something scandalous has happened in the last 5 years, chances are Hannah's already broken the exclusive, posted the receipts and moved on before you've even finished your toast. We're buzzing to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.
And back by popular demand, or at least that's what his ego tells him, is our very own Belsey Hall bowler, Jerry Brennan.
Thank you, Greg.
Oh, you're welcome.
Always.
Let me finish.
As always, an extraordinary pleasure to be in your company.
Community organiser, full-time thorn in the side of bureaucracy, and my partner in procedural crime as always. Jerry's the man who once tried to hold a public consultation in the queue at the Chippy and ended up with 3 signatures, a policy amendment and a free sausage supper. Jerry, it's always a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Greg.
Anyway, moving on, together we'll be diving into local news, media pressure, planning chaos, political accountability, and it's why it's often the quiet stories that cause the biggest explosions. And don't forget, our phone in is open tonight. Get a question, want to vent about a council decision, or fancy some friendly advice for the people who definitely might have an idea about what you're talking about. Give us a ring on 07379 399 288 and we'll get through as many of you as we can tonight. You're listening to radio on 107.7 FM, Listen Lanarkshire, and if you miss it this week, don't worry, the podcast drops on Thursday, so wherever you get your podcast, we will be available. Welcome to What's the Point. Jerry,
Greg,
where would you like to start since we've got this fantastic guest?
at the beginning, son.
At the beginning. Let's go there.
Hannah, what a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
First off, I want to congratulate you on your recent appointment.
Yes.
In April. You
Yeah.
became Chief Political Editor.
Just political editor,
Chief-
not chief political. I was
We
chief
like to call
reporter.
it.
We like to raise our guests.
Yes,
in-
I can
indeed.
tell.
We like to
Right.
raise it.
You're a relatively young journalist, right? And you've achieved I'm assuming way beyond what you thought of by this age. You, your family, your friends must be so proud. Tell us a bit about Hannah the journalist, how it began,
Yep.
and how you got to where you are now.
So, where should I start? So I started journalism in, how long ago was it, 2012? Yeah, that's when I kind of first went into journalism. So before that, I'd gone to uni in Belfast. I was studying microbiology,
Wow.
undergraduate. Did that, kind of hated it, probably halfway through the degree, but realised, my family had given up a lot for me to be able to go to university. I was halfway through, was like, right, I'm just going to finish the degree, and was like, I don't know why I've done this, because I just didn't enjoy it. Wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, so I ended up kind of working for a bit, and then I moved to Amsterdam for a couple of years and worked in the red light district. Not in that way. Not in that way. I worked in a hotel reception.
You're a chill-up salesperson.
No. Yeah, so I did that, and then I came back and did a master's at Strathclyde University in Glasgow in digital journalism.
Right.
And it was through that part of the course, a mandatory part of the course was you had to do like essentially work experience. So I got to do a week of work experience at the Evening Times, as it was then. And first of all, I learned more in that week than I had done on the 3 months or 6 months previously on my course. But secondly, the thing that struck me that week was I could do this forever. Like, I loved it immediately. I just thought, this is amazing. The first story I wrote was about rubbish not being collected on my own street.
do you know what it's like? It's like that saying, isn't it, that if you do something that you love, you'll never work a day in your life.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming it's like a vocational calling for you.
I think, I mean, it's not something I ever thought, you know, when I was younger, I want to be a journalist, you know, and I was never sort of that way sort of inclined, but I just kind of, I got into it, I suppose, through like music journalism. I did sort of write for music magazines and websites in Scotland, just reviewing gigs. It was basically a way to get free gig tickets. And then when I was in Amsterdam, and I thought, I'm not really sure what I'm doing, you know, with my life, and I'd seen this master's course at Strathclyde, so that's how I sort of ended up. I thought I'll give it a try, and I ended up really loving it. So so I started my career at the Evening Times, and I was there for about 5 years, and that was like, you know, working your way up from being a trainee reporter where you get sent on, you know, all the rubbish jobs basically, to I worked my way up to senior reporter, did a bit of like news desk stuff there, and then I moved to the Sunday Post after that. Was there for a couple of years, then moved back to the Herald on Sunday.
Are they part of the Evening Times, part of the Herald group?
Yeah, so it's the same group. So it was at the Sunday Post, then came back to the Herald on Sunday, and I was there for a couple of years as their chief reporter.
That's right.
And then in 2022, what are we on now?
25.
So 2020, I took a job with the Herald as their Westminster correspondent and arrived in London 6 weeks before the pandemic.
Oh, God.
So imagine being in a new place, in a new job during the pandemic, and your job is essentially to follow Boris Johnson around.
Wow.
Is that babysitting or following? I don't know what one that would qualify as. God almighty.
So that I mean, that was a crazy time. And it was a very weird time because, you know, you're in London and nothing is open and stuff like that. And then 2 years later, I came back up to Glasgow and started with the Sunday Mail. And that's where I am now.
Wow.
In your travels, who are the kind of journalistic titans that you worked with? Is there anyone that was a real inspiration to you when you were, you know, in your early stages? Just somebody that you looked up to and thought, you know, if I'm going to be a journalist, that's the kind of journalist that I want to be? Or are you totally unique?
Well, we're all unique in our own special way. But no, like, I mean, there's obviously people that I've worked with. For example, Tom Gordon, who's now at Daily Mail, I think, but he was the...
He was at Herald,
Sunday Herald kind of political editor, and then the Herald political editor for a long time. He was, you know, he just had a lot of time, and I'm sure he still does, has a lot of time for you, you know. He's really keen to help people. He was brilliant. My former editor at the Sunday Mail, who left just before Christmas time, Lorna Hughes, she's incredible. The best editor that I've ever had. And I mean, there's so many. Lindsay Watson as well, she was a colleague just at the Evening Times, but she was kind of more senior than me, and again really helped when you're stuck, but also she's just really good at her job. And I think that's the way that journalists, I think young journalists starting out, that's the best way to learn, is actually observing what people are doing around you, asking questions if you don't know how to do stuff, rather than kind of barreling in and acting as if you know how to do everything, and then, you know, you make mistakes and things like that. So But it's a bit of an issue nowadays because a lot of young journalists, you know, office newsrooms are totally different now than before the pandemic. A lot of young journalists now start on digital rather than actually going reporting out in the streets, like going talking to people. So I think a lot of, and I suppose it's like just a product of the younger generation, a lot of them don't have the communication skills in person that you kind of need as a journalist. They're used to speaking on text or, you know, through Facebook or whatever, rather than actually...
That's a really good point. We've met probably 2 or 3 times, and I feel that we've got a connection sort of thing, like, not personally you and I, but as a group. You don't get that unless you can eyeball someone, because you absolutely get a feel for whether that person's sincere or, you know, whether there's an edge to them or something about them. And I genuinely don't see how I think young journalists would be a real disadvantage.
For your information, with Ross Thompson on last week, Ross is the editor of the Wishaw Press and Airdrie Coatbridge Advertising. And it was basically, when we'd asked you, we wanted that contrast. So we've done the local, and now we're kind of looking at the national picture, especially when it comes to politics. And again, for those listening at home, Hannah, quite a lot of them might not know the name Hannah Rodger, but I can assure you the majority have picked a paper up on the Sunday, within the Sunday Mail, and seen a story or seen something that's a tribute.
Normally front page, Greg.
Especially when it comes to North Lanarkshire. But as I said again, these stories are critical for people's understanding. So you've covered stories that shine light on power dynamics, not just scandal, but how decisions get managed. How much influence do party machines still have over what politicians can say or do, especially at a local level? So what I mean by that is, do you still see the sort of that there's still politicians out there that can freely talk, or is it a case that party machinery's coming in and overstepping and making sure everybody's kind of...
I think it depends on what level. So if you have councillors in a council, they're more free, I think, to talk than, say, an MP. So what an MP says is quite closely monitored. I would say that they're much more conscious of what they should be saying and what they shouldn't be saying, and then they make a decision. Well, do I want to you know, annoy somebody by basically saying what I think or saying my opinion, which happens to be different from the party machine? So like Brian Leishman, the Labour MP, is a good example.
Very brave, Brian Leishman.
You know, and he constantly just says what he thinks and, you know, stands up for his constituents in the face of his own party, who are taking decisions which sometimes are not great for his constituents. And I would say in Holyrood as well, it's quite similar to Westminster in that sense, like MSPs. Holyrood's a bit more, I don't know, you always find some MSPs who are quite happy to talk. If it's on the record, it's a totally different thing to off the record. But, you know, I think there is still that level of like party machinery, as you call it, that people are very aware of what kind of things they can say and what they can't say, and it's just up to them really whether they say it or not.
What we're noticing is, especially ourselves, that politics is changing, and whether it's a case that the electorate no longer believes that the establishment parties or the established politics that exist in Scotland, it seems as if we're moving away from that dynamic. So again, a key phrase that kind of we've got in this is the idea of coming away from the element of truth now. So we're entering into an era of Trumpian style politics, and post-truth. And it's that idea that we're going to get to a stage where the mainstream political parties, they are kind of looking at this as controlled messaging, and is it a case that, well, in fact, you know what, we need to go back a wee bit and look at Bruiser style politics? Maybe it is a case that we need a couple of these individuals within the parties that are quick-witted and other things that can stand up to that. Do you see that slide now? Do you see the change?
I think when you're talking about that sort of establishment politics, when I see people, for example, making speeches in the House of Commons or in the Chamber in Holyrood, a lot of the time, and also particularly when ministers are answering questions, a lot of the time to me, I'm like, this is just rehearsed lines. You're not actually answering the question, you're not really giving information. For example, was it not last week but the week before, I think, there'd been some horrific knife incidents in Scotland over the weekend. It was very hot, and there was understandably a lot of questions about knife crime and sort of the law around knife crime, and John Swinney was being accused of sort of soft touch justice and things like that, and he was being asked very specific questions, and he just kept repeating the same statistics to each question, even though they didn't really fit the answer. And I'm like, this isn't acceptable, really. And I find that with, you know, not just when politicians are speaking to each other in Parliament, but on media, etc. A lot of the time I find you're getting these sort of stock responses, and you feel like regardless of the question that I have asked you, you're just going to say that same thing. You know, and sometimes I do get quite annoyed about it, and I think that's probably why it's a good thing I'm not a broadcast journalist, because I couldn't really get away with going mental at people. But it's really frustrating, and I feel like it's getting worse, and part of that is because, particularly in Scotland, I find that we're getting more and more people going into politics who have not had life experience.
We agree. We say this constantly.
I spoke about that a few weeks ago, and it's like the way we look at the system, Hannah, and the way that we've kind of described it as we've been through this podcast, is that it starts at the branch, and it's about branch control. And if you have branch control and you have an elected member, you can then dictate who levitates up through the constituency office, whether it's an MP or an MSP office, and then from there on to a candidacy for a councillor, and then from there you serve your time and you move on to either MSP or MP, but you are constantly controlling what comes up and what goes back down. And in that way, people are fearful of, they know if they screw up step one, they don't go to step two. If they screw up at step two, they don't go to step three, or they move back down. And that,
there's a point you're missing. There's a pragmatic element of that as well. So you think about it, let's take, for talking's sake, Coatbridge, and really in effect you've never had a job before, and all of a sudden you're now elected as an elected member, as a councillor, so you've got 20 odd £1,000, and then on top of that you're wanting for your MSP's constituency office, there another 30,000. So you all of a sudden,
a mortgage payment,
anything that what you were on previously, whether it be benefits or low income, you'll now find yourself on £50,000 to £55,000 per year, and you're going to protect that.
Yes, you will.
With every fibre of your being. And that's where I think the issue in politics is. With regards to the messaging, because I'm going to stick you in this, Jerry, because you work for an MSP.
I do work for a fine MSP.
That messaging that comes out with the hot topics and in the SNP sort of internal party machinery, making sure that everybody's on point to get that message out. So that's why, especially us, when we're reading stuff or hearing interviews, and they all have the same regurgitated line, you're looking and you're going, well, the party machinery's kicking in here. You're not actually getting an honest answer anywhere. And last night was a typical example of that. When we watched the TV debate, you and I were howling in that position.
I'm going to begin, Greg, because we'll talk about this. We're going to talk about the Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse by-election taking place this Thursday.
This Thursday,
yeah. So we're going to...
I thought it was last week, so I was planning all this stuff for the Sunday's paper, and then I realised halfway through the week, I've got another week to go.
Well.
So
Now, before we get ourselves into trouble, I'm going to name all the candidates and the parties they represent. So first of all, we have Colette Bradley, the Scottish Socialists, Andy Brady, Scottish Family Party, Ross Lambie, Reform UK, Katie Loudon, Scottish National Party, Janice Mackay, United Kingdom Independence Party, Anne McGuinness, Scottish Green Party, Aisha Mears, Scottish Lib Dems, Richard Nelson, Conservative and Unionist Party, Davy Russell, Labour, and Mark Williamson, who is the only independent candidate. So we've covered ourselves, and we can now freely chat about
the Hamilton by-election. Well, since you've been so involved in that kind of aspect of things for the Sunday Mail, Hannah, have you seen the sort of the story emerging there, where the sort of party image is being protected more than the sort of candidate is presenting to the electorate. Is we watched the interview last night with Davy Russell, I think it was, and Davy Russell's been accused of, I know, coming forth for interviews, but also on social media there's clear editing taking place in videos and things like that. Do you think it's more about the actual sort of imaging in this election rather than is it a credible candidate?
Well, when it comes to Davy Russell, I'm not entirely sure what's going on there. To be honest, I just think that, you know, and I've spoken to some people who've also worked with him when he was at Glasgow City Council, and he said even then he wasn't like a big talker, you know, in meetings. It's not like he would be the one doing all the presenting and you know, so it could be he's just not that confident a public speaker, although whenever I've talked to him he does seem quite open and approachable. But maybe that's not one of his strengths. That's fine. But I think if that's the case, you need to kind of lay that out at the beginning rather than just kind of reject all these offers of interviews and then people say, well, why are you avoiding scrutiny? Why are you, you know, what is it you've got to hide? And I think particularly in his case, I think Anas Sarwar's having to do quite a lot of heavy lifting on his behalf because otherwise people, you know, it would become a bit of a laughing stock situation.
So what I watched it last night with my sons, right, teenage sons, so they're watching it, and there's only 2 on. So the first question is, right, how many people are standing in this? There's 7 or 8.
10.
Well, where are they? 10. And then one by one they come on after the debate that took place between Katie Loudon and Ross, and they were just too busy, you know. They're working, they've got casework to do, they've got family commitments, you know, a plethora of run-of-the-mill excuses for not presenting themselves in front of the cameras. And immediately to me that just says, and I may be wrong in this is just my own perspective, if you are not prepared to go and test yourself on the hustings, cameras rolling and all the rest of it, you're not going to be an effective politician, and you're not for me.
Well, that's the point that I've been making, you know, if you're, and again, there's nothing wrong with being uncomfortable speaking in public, uncomfortable in that situation. But if you are going to be a politician, unfortunately, part of that job is you do have to do some public speaking. You know, it's a big part of the job. You have to be able to put across your points succinctly. You want, ideally, this is how it should work. You're trying to convince other people to come to your point of view so that you'll vote in the same way, that you'll make the same decisions. If people are not able to put themselves up for an interview, just one-on-one even, what are they going to do when they get into Holyrood and stand in that chamber and have to actually make a speech or speak to constituents? Or, you know, it's strange. It's been a very strange by-election.
Well, this is again, is why would you put up a candidate that you know you're going to have such national coverage on? And if they're no articulate, if you look at the Rurruglan by-election, was last time was a major by-election, that within that, that was, I think Katie Loudon stood in that as well, and then you had the guy for Labour who was very, very polished, and Michael Shanks, who's now a government minister. So you look at the calibre that Labour was putting up, and then we start to look at the calibre now. Now I believe politics is a broad church. It should be a broad church, but the point being is I'm kind of looking now and I'm seeing this sort of version of politics where we're lowering standards. And I think that's where the rise of certain individual parties coming in are making an inroad and making ground.
But also, just before we go on to that, I would say, like, if we're talking about Davy Russell, because I don't know the backgrounds of some of the other smaller parties' candidates, right? But, you know, speaking to him, he seems a very nice person,
affable. We spoke to him out there.
I'm sure that he would appeal to people in this area. He is part of, like, the constituency that he's standing in, that's where he's from, you know. But I feel like maybe he has been victim to the machine, you know. Labour has maybe tried to polish him in some way, or tried to make him present himself in a certain way that's not him, whereas if they had just said, look, just go and do your best, okay, you might make a few mistakes, you might get some people's names wrong, but maybe teach them a way to kind of just laugh that off, because that's being a human being. You know, people don't want these robot politicians. You know, so maybe we're actually being too hard on them by saying, oh, look at this, look at that. Like, it's perfectly normal to make these mistakes, but it's because we're holding up politicians to be like, it's almost like we're saying they have to be these robots.
Do you know, that's probably the best description of it that I can think of. This doesn't apply to all 77 councillors in North Lanarkshire, by the way, but there are more and more kind of robots that I see coming through.
Well, the robots are the ones usually who have not had any other life experience.
Well, but and those are the ones who get themselves propelled forward, who've never really had any work experience or life experience beyond working in a constituency office, being a councillor, understanding motions and amendments and all the procedural stuff. But it got me thinking about our previous life, Greg, when we were in the SNP, and I was going back through old minutes of group meetings that Greg and I had attended, and this, and I'm
really
sitting,
know how to live.
Honestly, I'm thinking to myself, right, we have our own group meetings, right? So we're a small group, 7 of us, but it's quite bombastic because he's got a lot to say. I disagree mostly with him,
which is healthy,
and other people disagree. So there's that, but that brings me on, and it brings him on because he doesn't like being challenged, and I like challenging him. So we go ahead that way. If you want to challenge anything in the SNP North Lanarkshire group, you've got to submit what you're going to want on the agenda to be vetted by the leader of the group and the business manager. So see if they don't want to talk about it, it doesn't go on the agenda. So you don't get that opportunity to have the to and fro and debate and argue and thinking on your feet and all of that. Dead. So the robot will.
So how does that work then, right? Say we're in a political party and I've got a problem with, I don't know, the pub that we go to every Tuesday night, for example. Would I have to submit this point about, Tuesday night drinks venue to somebody in advance, and then they say, oh well, we're quite happy with the pub, so we're not going to discuss that.
That's basically it. So the argument that we bring forward all the time is discourse is really dead within a North Lanarkshire context, and that's probably a question for you. Do you see that elsewhere? Because our experience of this authority is that debate is no longer encouraged.
It's dead.
We obviously pride ourselves on the fact that he can vote whatever way he wishes to vote. I vote whatever way I wish to vote, and we can disagree respectfully. It's not a case that you're looking for what votes, etc.
No.
But the problem that I think is now, and again I'm going to come on to a wee question for you in a second in this, but again what we're seeing as more and more of is we've lost that idea of having, in my opinion, if you look at local government, it used to be retirees, former teachers and professionals, etc. But it was a broad church, so it was made up of other people coming for the community. I think that's now lost. I think that basically part of machinery's kicked in and everybody's whipped into submission. And when we look at discourse that exists within local politics, I don't think it exists anymore. I think it's died a death. But the question for you would be in that is considering the fact we're talking about whether or no politicians are appropriate to hold the role as politician, you've covered some major stories in North Lanarkshire, and I think that anybody at all listening, again, front page of the Sunday Mail, there's significant things in there without getting into anything really, because it's still a legal issue there. How do you personally approach reporting on sensitive allegations involving politicians? How do you do that?
Well, obviously it depends on what, there's not one way to go about any story like that, because it really depends on the circumstances, who the person is, who's making the allegation, or how you've come about that, receiving that information. Is the source credible or not? Is there potential motives for them? But one thing that is probably the same regardless of the circumstance is the amount of fact checking that you have to do on any story like that, where you're aware that it could potentially ruin somebody's career, it could potentially lose them their job, in some cases it could lose them their relationship, or you have to be so confident in the information that you're reporting, because it's a huge responsibility. And I know that people might think, oh, journalists, scumbags, they're just digging up any old rubbish and it's all lies. That's not the case. And I would say for 99% of journalists, they don't wake up in the morning seeking to ruin people's lives, and they also don't wake up in the morning seeking to report inaccuracies either. But with stories like that, sometimes it can take months to get a story to the point where you're able to publish it, because you just have so much work to do to verify even minuscule details. And it's not something that we take lightly if we know that it's going to have quite possibly a very negative effect on somebody's life. But you also have to balance that with the public interest. And in many of the stories like that I've done, there's a significant public interest in reporting over not reporting it, because people need to know the truth about what's going on and what people what their elected politicians are actually doing.
It's often about what your elected politicians are allowed to debate and discuss, because it can be constructed within councils. I mean, I'll speak about council because that's my experience, but you can manipulate standing orders to the point, and I believe they've been manipulated to the point right now where debate is stifled, and the 6-month rule can apply. But if you continuously apply that 6-month rule to ensure that you're not talking about changing standing orders or governance procedures, then you kick debate so far down the line. And you could effectively do that for a whole 5-year period. Just every 6 months introduce another motion to council, and that kicks the can down the road, and debate dies.
But see, in that situation, I would say that's, I'm not saying it's corrupt, but it's some sort of manipulation of the system to basically, as you say, stifle any debate but kind of retain control.
So the born identity.
Is there no... What can you do about that? Is there no kind of overarching body that you can complain to and say?
We find the overarching body's just a veneer. That's what we find. We find that it's just there to provide public reassurance, but the actual structure and complete structure and things like that.
When you dig
in.
So it's just not fit for purpose.
So what we then have is this creation and illusion that this governance structure's here and this is how you're meant to operate within the governance structure. But in fact, I think if the majority of people knew, they'd be quite surprised and outraged. There would be practically protests in the street.
I mean, the checks and balances that are supposed to exist,
non-existent,
are not really effective. So, and you can argue if you want that's democracy. If we win the election and we get more councillors than you, or we get more MSPs than you, or more MPs than you, then that's the democratic process, and you have to write it out in opposition.
Because you still won your seat or your place, so therefore people want to have your opinion included as part of the decision making process. It shouldn't be the case that it's just, well, we're the bigger party, so everything we say goes, and nobody else gets to have any say.
So, in councils, if Greg and I wanted to change something, right, we would generally go through full council or committee structure and bring forward a motion. So just take full council, for example, right? So we propose a change, a motion. That's got to be okayed by the civic head of the council, who happens to be a part of the administration. So if they don't want that to go through, they can decide that motion's not competent. There's no matrix, there's no measurement. There's no scoring matrix
on what's competent and what's not competent.
Right, it's just somebody's opinion, basically.
It's somebody's opinion. So it could be the most cogent, well-written motion ever presented. It could have gold tassels and bells and whistles and all the rest of it, and it wouldn't be deemed competent because it's a sore point.
But this stems back into why people are feeling so disengaged with politics, in my opinion. If it's a case that you feel the status quo is the only thing that's on offer to you, again, Labour's mantra of change, everybody thought, well, here, look, there's a wee bit of optimism, let's start looking at this. What does this actually mean? Well, it means a cut to your sort of winter fuel payment, it means a 2-child cap, it means all these different things. That's the reason, I think, because you're not having that open discourse anymore. You've got the party political machinery sitting in there, and then potentially you've also got the wrong candidates being put into positions of leadership, etc. And that for me, again, robots or whatever, but again, we come back to the stories that you've covered in relation to sort of scandalous issues that exist in North Lanarkshire. What's the pressure like when you're writing a story like that? I imagine that would be significant, and when you're looking to try and go with a story to take it forward to make sure it's in public interest.
Well, pressure, there's various elements of pressure. There's never pressure from, in my most recent employer's case, there's never any pressure from the editor. You must, do this. With a story of such magnitude, if you cannot get it to the point where it's ready for publication, we're not going to risk publishing something. Yeah. But I put a lot of pressure on myself, just, every day, because I like to do a good job. But for some stories, once the story, the initial story, because there's always multiple stories when it's something of this nature, once the initial story has been done, then pressure starts to come from political parties or trade unions or, so then in some cases I've had political parties who will, dismiss the story and say that it's all a load of rubbish, or they'll threaten to complain to the press regulator, or they'll, in private be having, chats with other journalistic colleagues in other newspapers, thinking that they're not going to talk to me, and say, just to let you know that story's all rubbish, to basically try and stop other newspapers from picking it up. Because what happens then is, a story breaks, then everyone goes, oh, that's a good story, we want a bit of that as well. They'll all start looking into their own elements, and it's like a big sort of explosion then. People will get, an angle on one element, another, and you might have a week's worth of coverage. Whereas if they can cut it off at the source and try and convince other journalists that the story is inaccurate in some way, then it makes, I'm not saying that bad journalists would believe them, but less experienced journalists might be more cautious to look at it, because they'll think, legally that might be a problem, I'm not going to get involved. And that's happened quite a few times now. Where I've done a story very significant, and I've later very quickly discovered that the party machine, as we're talking about, is kind of activated, and there's been attempts to try and discredit me, discredit the stories, etc. But it's a bit stupid, because journalists talk to each other. So if I found out someone was trying to discredit a colleague's story to me, I would tell the colleague. I'd say, by the way, they're on the phone trying to. Exactly.
Is it only politicians though, or do the formal structures of the councils ever become involved?
Or the government?
It
depends. I would say, if you're talking, do you mean like civil servants?
No, well, civil servants or council officers, for example. If it looks as if it was
in a two-tier level, as it happened at a government level and in an authority level, especially within North Lanarkshire.
Like if it was to say it was a bad news story, would you ever be approached by officers to kind of throw you off a story, for example?
Well, when you say officers, who counts as an officer?
Civil servants.
Civil servants, chief execs, finance.
You could be.
Chief officers, stuff like that.
You could be, I would say it's more common, obviously, in a council sense for the press office, and they're technically civil servants, or if, But it does happen.
Right, because that leads us nicely to the next kind of question. You also covered a massive story in North Lanarkshire, the £1.8 billion Mears contract.
Oh, yeah.
And
the largest
public sector procurement contract in history, and you seem to be the only person that was covering this story.
Well, I could talk about this all day, but that's a product of the state of my industry, unfortunately. You know, there's fewer and fewer local journalists now, and there's whole council areas that now have no scrutiny at all. But with this one, I was very surprised that literally nobody had picked this up. But it's because, as well, you know, journalists are not getting as much time to learn on the job because everything's about quick, get it online.
Almost kind of goes back to that whole thing. If you're starting from the ground up rather than on a digital platform, you're doing the person thing, so you're learning about.
But you also have to sit through council meetings in person. You have to read a council
apprenticeship
report, so then you know how to read it and you know what to look for. Whereas if you're just thrown in and told, you know, oh, can you rewrite 10 stories that were on the Daily Mail today? You're not learning how to actually scrutinise public documents and information that is really important. So I think that's potentially why as well, because that experience is not there in our industry anymore. But that was an interesting story.
Significantly prevalent, especially within this authority, and to be honest, I think that from your perspective, when that contract was sort of nodded through in the latter stages, we were absolutely aghast that there was nothing coming from anywhere actually looking into it or anything. It just went as if it was like a ghost in the room. It was nodded through and then there was nothing.
Well, it was like you were handing over a $5 for a packed lunch or something.
It was bizarre.
It was the size of the contract itself deserved scrutiny, like huge scrutiny. And our role as elected members is to be the critical scrutiny body of the council and to protect the public pound. So if you're elected, your job is to pour through each report as it comes, look at all the recommendations going through, come up with a way to debate and question officers and all the rest of it. And just at the tail end of that, when it was about to be awarded, then it was like dynamite. This story came through from a whistleblower to say that the company, the incumbent, Mears, whatever iteration it was of Mears, whether it was Mears LLP, Mears UK, Mears Group, whatever it was, had manipulated
KPIs.
And this same group, or a part of that main group, are going to be awarded this contract as a single bidder. And as elected members, we're like, my God.
I mean, to me it seemed very, very serious, and I didn't feel as if, you know, so for anyone who's not familiar, I suppose, with the story, essentially, you know, I received a tip-off that the company that manages all the housing repairs, like repairs to homes in council homes in North Lanarkshire, had essentially been manipulating their figures so that it made it look as if they were completing, you know, say they had 1,000 repairs to do, it looked as if they were completing all 1,000 repairs and all within the time scale that was agreed with the council. So therefore that means they would get all their money and they might get a bonus or something because they've completed it. But in fact, the data was being manipulated, and they weren't actually completing all those jobs on time. They were only, say, completing 700 of the 1,000 on time. But the way they were marking it down in the system, essentially it was manipulation of the figures. So this is the company that was doing that was part of, like, a subsidiary of the company that was proposing to, you know, bid for this £1.8 billion contract to do essentially the same thing.
Job.
So I thought this is a huge issue. You know, I'm quite surprised that aside from the members of Progressive Change North Lanarkshire and Megan Gallagher, actually, the Tory MSP, who I think used to be a councillor.
She was a councillor,
Aside from them, nobody was willing to talk about it. No one was willing to say, like, even we're concerned about this. It was almost like they just thought it was all, that's a load of rubbish. You know, they wanted it to go away. And then through reporting and through then the follow-up of you know, people like yourselves in the council saying, well, this isn't acceptable.
Yeah.
You know, they were essentially forced to do an investigation, and lo and behold, it turns out they have been manipulating the figures. You know, but then the company still got awarded the contract.
I mean, the scary thing about all of that, right, from my perspective, was the investigation, the remit or the timescale for that investigation was so short. It was like 14 months, right? So Mears had been in. They took over from Morrison, who were the original contract holders. So they'd been doing the work for the best part of 10 years. And they chose 14 months to look at that. So within 14 months, there was 13,000 fraudulent KPIs identified. God knows how many went beyond that. And my concern about that, having worked in social housing for as many years as I have, it impacted on potentially on all committee reports going back for many years about satisfaction surveys, about returns to the Scottish Government through the Scottish Housing Regulator. And then from that you're thinking, right, okay, or I was thinking, if even one of these jobs has been invoiced and a payment has been made, then the potential for fraud was really high. And that was the concern that I had for that.
The thing that leaves a lasting impression for me on that whole story, and it's twofold for me. One, there was a meeting where the press and the public were excluded, and at that press and public exclusion meeting, there was only us asking questions, which I always found really bizarre, because if you think of the administration, you think of the opposition, surely there is a list of questions as long as you're at them, because your story was already out there in the open, so surely people would have read that, considering the fact that politicians do nothing but read press articles. Again, I found it rather bizarre. In addition to that as well, the other thing is your line of questioning resulted in me getting a Standards Commission complaint out of that as well.
Yeah, we felt a lot of heat.
We felt a lot of heat of that, because we were asking pertinent questions in regards to what your story actually brought to North Lanarkshire. And I think power to your elbow, because we need more people that are actually going to actually put out that public interest story and make sure it happens. So I do kind of empathise to a certain degree as well with local press and local journalists, and that's what we're trying to talk to Ross about last week. It's about making sure that if you're only there watching the Watchmen, then who is it? Who is going to do it?
That's the point as well, because even you were talking about this in terms of the regulators who actually are ineffective. You know, they don't regulate, they don't take action when there's something going on and people are complaining. They just want to say, well, we can't deal with your complaint because it's somebody else. And it's the same with the housing regulator for this. The housing regulator were informed about the concerns to do with this Mears contract way before I got word of it, and they basically just palmed the person off. You know,
I'm not going to name the other regulator, right, because I think it would be too dangerous to do it, right? But we identified in a document about 17 red flags prior to the award of that contract, right? And we met with one of the regulators, and here's what they told us: thank you for that information. We're under no obligation to do anything with it.
3 hours.
If we do anything with it, we're no obligation to update you on what we do anything with it. If we don't do anything with it, we've no obligation to tell you about that either. So that's the level.
It's the veneer.
That's the level that we're operating at. If there's something to come of it, we won't necessarily tell you about it, and if there isn't, we won't do that either. And I think I left that whole process just thinking, you know what, this is a farce. There's a farcical element to this veneer, as you
and
say,
top to bottom. That's what it is. I think it's
of checks and balances
in such a way for anybody that's lay person or anybody that's lay minded just to come into it and go, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed by all of this.
I mean,
but anybody coming with a professional background, you're seeing it for what it is immediately. You're looking and you're going, this is a scam. This is what this is.
But that's, I mean, I suppose as well, that's why journalism is so important, because, you know, I don't have to jump through all these hoops and, you know, say things in a proper way. I just, when I write stories, I write them for a readership who doesn't have a professional background, who aren't experts in the area, and if something doesn't make sense and it's a load of rubbish, then that point will be made in an article. You know, and I don't care if it's not proper or not according to the procedure and standing order, blah blah. Do you know what I mean? That's, I think, and a lot of the time actually people do end up coming to me or my colleagues because they have frustrated the process. They've not got anywhere with, you know, say a housing regulator or a standards regulator or whoever. You know, they've tried, they've gone to the police, maybe the government, their MSP, they've gone the whole way through a process to try and get some sort of resolution. Nobody has been able to help them, so that's when they end up coming to a journalist, and then the journalist goes, this is absolute nonsense, runs a story, the next day the issue is resolved. You know, and it shouldn't be that way, and I've always thought that it should not take somebody having to phone a journalist and say, you know, I don't know, my boiler's broken and my housing hasn't fixed it for 6 years or something.
Or some horrendous stories out there, there's no doubt about that. But coming back to the idea that local elements of things, you ran a story this weekend on Sunday, and
what a story that was,
with regards to Orchard Brae and the Orchard Brae development that's currently coming through. Planning
application and planning meeting on the 12th of June.
And your story featured a very prominent individual for the world of football. So when Graham Souness publicly weighs in the Orchard Brae, what was your first reaction to that? What did you think?
Well, the first thing was I had to ask my boyfriend, who's
Graham?
Who's this guy? What's this all about? I was like, Graham Souness. No, but genuinely, the first thing I did have to do is educate myself on why Graham Souness is, you know, such a prominent figure in Scottish football, and learned all about him and his moustache and things like that.
His tight shots.
So, you know, but to me, I don't. You could be anybody. You can be a Bob on the street, or you can be some king from some country or whatever. I don't see that when I do a story. I just see, you know, a person that's in front of me. So it doesn't really faze me if people are celebrities or whatnot. But I thought it was interesting when Graham Souness was getting involved himself, because it's quite unusual to see if a company is proposing a development of any kind. You know, normally it's the company that's being quite closed about it. They're like, we're just going to put this proposal forward and councillors will do what they want to do. Now, whatever's going on behind the scenes, that's another thing, but publicly, normally companies are very sort of boring and bland when it comes to these things, and it's usually the community groups who are more outspoken. But this was almost the other way around. So the kind of campaign group, is it Faskin, Woodall and
what's the name? Oh God,
we've only had about 18,000 emails
from them. Give me a second. I think it's
Calderbank.
No, I think it's the park.
Palace Craig.
Palace Craig or Palace Rig?
Palace Rig.
Is it Palace Craig?
Palace Craig. We'll go with Palace Craig, even if it's wrong.
That's how rubbish we are. Jerry.
So the campaign group, they were actually more sort of closed about it. They were the ones who said, well, the council officers will decide. And I thought, that what's going on here? You've got Graham Souness going off his nut, and you've got these community campaigners, or the sensible ones in that whole thing. But no, I mean, clearly, you know, he is a successful businessman. I don't think that he is maybe used to being told no. He's used to having successful projects, and I think that maybe this is a project that, you know, he's obviously very passionate about it and very invested in it.
I was going to say financially invested, I imagine.
Well, you would presume so. And the fact that whether he gets to do this or not is down to basically a handful of people that he doesn't know, and he cannot influence them. He shouldn't influence them. He can't. He's not allowed to, you know, take you out for dinner and say, oh, do you want to just support my thing? So, you know, I suppose this is one way of him getting his view across, and he's
And he does. He will hold a heavy weight among a constituent of West of Scotland individuals, given his very prominent role in Rangers over the years. So when someone like Graham Souness, and immediately when I thought about that, when I saw Graham's name, I don't know the man, but when I saw Graham's name and the name of one of our councillor colleagues mentioned, I thought, what a lot of pressure to bring on that individual. And I thought from a councillor's perspective, I thought that was very unfair.
So I sent an email out on Sunday after reading the article. I was a wee bit sort of infuriated at the fact that such a big public figure has now involved himself in what really is what's called a quasi-judicial process. The elected members, and basically what that means is elected members have to vote independently, not party politically or anything like that, and they base their vote on what's been presented to them. And when I read the article, I'm looking at it and I'm going, talk about trying to intimidate or else potentially intimidate or potentially sort of bully elected members into a position,
or try and manipulate
and I'm looking at it and I'm going, is this where our democracy's gone then, that elected members can't just make a decision based on the facts that they're presented on the day? Because ultimately, if it's a good idea, then elected members will vote that way. If it's a bad idea, elected members will vote that way. Having such a prominent figure come forward, I just found it rather bizarre, and asked the council's most senior legal advisor, can you make sure that all 77 members are being briefed on what the law and what the rules actually are, because they need to know, because ultimately being an elected member at a local government level doesn't sound that sexy or fascinating, but it comes with a lot of ramifications at the back of it as well, especially when you're starting to look at whether a Standards Commission complaint or something like that will come at the back. So to protect the members, but also what challenge is the council putting up in regards to that? Why no take that person on and say, look, listen, that's not how we do things. This is a quasi-judicial process, and members will be allowed to make their decisions whatever way they seem or deem fit.
But then I suppose, Orchard Brae are allowed to have their opinion, and if they're giving their opinion via an article in the Sunday Mail, then who's to say they can't do that? But that's it's
the
not like they're going to turning up and heckling councillors personally at their offices. I suppose it's a tricky
the thing
one.
for me is again in that campaign group's right it's the campaigns group doesn't have the access to that big publication, or doesn't have the access to these things, whereas that individual would. That's kind of where I'm seeing it as a wee bit unbalanced.
Well, I think the campaign group, who are obviously very opposed to these plans, they obviously feel a bit like a David and Goliath situation with this, but we'll just see. Can I ask you a question, right?
Yeah.
See, when I'm not talking about this application, but see, for any application, like any planning application, you're saying like you go in and you have to vote based on what's in front of you. What do you like? What information do you get? Do you get
as a councillor, we would expect a briefing paper or something of that out, where the planning department has laid everything out, and this is where it be land surveys or whatever it may be, and environmental impact assessments, all these different things, all that kind of things incorporated into a report. And within that report, really in effect, an elected member's meant to digest every single bit of that information. But here's the issue is, in this case, is the timescale before that report is published. Now I think we're due to meet, is it this week or next week?
It's the 12th.
The 12th.
So I sit on planning.
12th of June,
So I sit on planning, and I sit on the local review body, which is planning appeals. So basically, Greg's correct. There'll be a report, there'll be details about the application itself, and there'll be an officer report and an officer recommendation, right? And the application is based on a number of different factors, but principally on the National Planning Framework 4, which is a national guidance. It's called NPF 4, and underneath that is the local development plans that the local authority produce. So those are the two principal elements of it. And some applications will go to committee, but some won't. Under delegated powers, councillors over the years have delegated powers to officers to make the determination on their own. So delegated authority is a big issue.
There's another bit you're missing in that as well, like Loch Lomond and things like that, right? So again, it's my understanding, and
that's the next bit.
This is my understanding. So like Loch Lomond, you hear the reporter, and everybody will always say if a thing doesn't go through plan, it's referred to the reporter. Now obviously the SNP's been promising for God near ions in relation to reviewing the planning system, but they never actually have. Last time we had a review, it was a couple of years ago, but again the community's right to appeal was completely dismissed in that. So the process here is if a refusal is made by at a local level, so say the council decides in a planning application process it's not happy with a developer or whatever it may be, then it goes to the reporter. It's presented in such a fashion that that's the Scottish Government's report, and they'll just overturn the decision in favour of the developer. But there is an actual fact where planning officers within a local authority have far more say in regards to the reporter and how that works.
There's the issue about, so you put an application into the council, the planning committee may sit and judge on it, right? And the 40 members of that committee may say we don't want that development to go through. It'll then potentially go to appeal, and the local review body agree with officers that it doesn't meet the criteria and there's no mitigating circumstances or material considerations, they call it. That applicant might appeal to the Scottish Government or the reporter. Now, what happens after that point is opaque. So communities do not know what happens after that. And see, to be honest, elected members don't know either.
They don't know.
Now, the assumption that we have made is that because the council is the official planning authority, there must be dialogue between the Scottish Government and the planning authority and we don't know whether the role that they play is as a statutory consultee or simply providing information about it to allow the reporter, whoever that is, and we assume that that's a former planning officer somewhere to go through. But it's the opaque nature of it and the fact that nobody understands that process well enough for it to hold any for communities to have confidence in it.
It's interesting as well because the SNP, one of their big things is about transparency, you know, and I mean, I could
wax lyrical.
Yeah, but I'd say that they're far from transparent. But if they want to try and make Scotland and Scottish public bodies more transparent and accountable, then they should start with stuff like that.
I agree.
And what the role of a reporter is, I think that's a really, really critical part to start with.
Who is it?
Well, again, that's the question.
If you're out there, give us a phone.
Get the number out for the reporter.
077, whatever it is. But listen, we're coming to the end.
Oh, really?
Thank you so much.
Quick.
But one last question for me. Where do you think in all of this madness that is now Scottish politics, where do you think we're going to end up? Do you think that it's going to be dystopian and Orwellian, or do you think that we're actually going to pull together and sort it out? Where do you think it's going to go?
Well, I think it's going to be a bumpy ride.
Yeah.
I think Nigel Farage is going to have a bit more involvement for the short term. The SNP needs to sort its stuff out.
Stop hemorrhaging members.
Yeah, and obviously there's police stuff going on that needs to be resolved there before the party can properly sort of recover fully. But I think and who knows what's going to happen with Labour as well, to be honest, but I think what we really need is a new generation of politicians who have had decent life experience, who are in it for the right reasons and want to actually make people's lives better rather than make their own lives better.
Well, Hannah Rodger for the Sunday Mail,
thank you
so much. This has been enlightening and greatly appreciated. Please know that you've always got an open invitation to come on the show whenever you want. You might
I'll be back next week.
Run a mile. But anyway, just before we come back, we're coming back with our phone-in section. Jerry, our political highlights of the week.
Look forward to
and
that
we're going to be talking about that interview last night again, because I'm still laughing all the fact that Jerry. So tune in shortly, a couple of wee songs, and then we'll be back. And after these quick tunes. Hello and welcome back to What's the Point? It's your old pals Greg Lennon and Jerry Brennan. Well, Jerry,
good evening.
Rodgers has just left the studio. Do you know what a guest?
Puts your faith back in journalism.
It does.
And Jerry, we've had two brilliant guests.
Yep.
Rhys Thompson last week from Wisha Press and Daily Record, and this week the new political editor of the Sunday Mail, Hannah Rodger. Absolutely brilliant guest, and a source of knowledge on and off air. Greg, it's phenomenal having someone like that in the studio.
Important to recognise as well, but even within the industry of journalism, it is recognised that local level reporting, especially in amongst sort of aspiring journalists, that where they used to cut their teeth in council business, etc.
I think
that the pressures that exist there.
I think the public don't. They look at journalists now and they're not as tangible.
Yeah.
You don't have local press offices in your local town. Like we used to have one in Bells Hill growing up for the Bells Hill Speaker, and we used to know where the office was and you would know who the reporter was. And now they seem so far away. They seem, as if everyone works for a big national and they're not touchable. And what I like about Hannah and what I liked about Ross when I met him too is that they're so down to earth. They're like you and I.
Well, this is the thing, and we need to be honest again. What kind of discourse do we want in our politics now, especially as we go to that untruth politics? I keep getting feedback.
Post-truth, sir.
Post-truth feedback, politics, and what kind of political system do we want? Because ultimately, as I say, people are looking for something different now. We can't escape that fact. And if it's a case that the mainstream political parties aren't going to really take notice of that, then it's going to be challenging.
I think the point that Hannah made there about the kind of rocky road that we're in for over the next wee while, with the likes of Nigel Farage, it's going to be a challenge. We're moving to the phones.
I'm going to say, I think there's somebody trying to get through now, Jerry, so let's see if I can try and work this out. Hello there, somebody there? Hello there.
How you doing, guys?
Good.
How can we help you?
I've just got a wee question to put to you, right? First of all, I'd like to say how much I'm enjoying your show.
Very
I've been watching it from the start. I normally watch it on YouTube, right enough. This is the first time I've listened on the radio. So if you go on, you'll see one we like.
Yes, so you're the one person that listens to it, so that's phenomenal.
Brilliant.
Listen, we're doing a Christmas night out, so we'll get in touch with you.
You're buying.
I'm trying to drum up a wee bit of support for you as well, guys.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Right, so you were talking last week about the Brown Down chapters and community petitions, right? And there were clips in your show prior to that. I think it was the show before that.
Did you enjoy them?
I very much. It was showing you a clip of Paul Damashville when he was kicked out of the chamber. Trying to raise a debate about that.
Yep.
Even though that something like 1,700 people had signed that petition as well.
Yep.
I suppose my question to you guys then is, how is that like a minority party like yourself, right, and other independents, how are they ever supposed to get a chance to change things when, Labour and SNP, well, at least it seems to me, what they want to do is shut you down and kick you out of the chamber?
It's a brilliant question. I'm not going to lie. It's very on point this week as well, to be perfectly honest.
I mentioned that to Hannah Rodger. I'm assuming that you caught the conversation that we had with Hannah earlier on.
Yeah, just the tail end of it there, yeah.
So I kind of mentioned that to Hannah about the lack of. It almost seemed to me as if it's like North, rather than North Lanarkshire, it's like North Korea. Well, and there's a couple of names that they use. Like we had mentioned before about changing the name of the debating chamber, because there's no debate takes place in it, to either the dictatorium or Presidente or
Oh, I don't know if I tell you one. Sorry, caller, but I need to tell him this now before it fades from memory. I was walking down the street and the other week there, and somebody shouted on to me, "Greg, how are you getting on with Kim Jong Jim?" And I thought, oh my goodness, this is starting to resonate for people.
But it is, caller, it's really difficult to get. First of all, it's difficult to get. We most of the work that we do to change things is going through the committee and the council process through motions. So you'll bring a motion to the committee, and that has to be vetted first by the provost, and the provost will decide whether or not it meets the criteria to go forward. And if he decides that it's not going forward, then you're done, mate.
So do you think, just for the caller here as well, Jerry, do you think there's a lowering in the standard then of motions? Because if you look at it, right, and I'm being cynical here, it might be a wee bit unfair.
Greg,
It might be a wee bit unfair, but
I don't think you're a cynical man.
But if you look at the standard of motion that's produced within North Lanarkshire, right, and take for talk's sake this full council that's coming up now as well. So what you're asking, caller, what chance does an independent or minority group have to make any change in North Lanarkshire? Well, I can answer you that's practically zero, because the point being is the standard of motions that's coming forward. So it seems to be things like, let's say, I don't know, the wheel in your wheelie bin has fell off, and is there a process that exists within the council for you to raise that? Now, granted, that'll probably about 0.1% in North Lanarkshire electorate. Don't have that as a bugbear issue. But is that really something that you want to hear in comparison to school transport, or is that something you want to hear in relation to community centre closures? If you've got other politicians in that room that might have a different idea, by the way, we don't think that these centres need to be closed. We need to cut back on capital expenditure and actually put that back into the facilities that we've got. Is that such a daft idea? And these things only seen the light of day because the gatekeeper, who is the Lord Provost, who does not benchmark or score or have a matrix position to say that this motion's not been accepted because you don't hit these criteria, he's just saying no real plausible explanation to it. And unfortunately, until we change the administration, I think the chance of discourse and debate in North Lanarkshire Council is practically dead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you know how many councillors exist in North Lanarkshire. There's 77 councillors, and in order to get a motion through to change policy or to change approach, you need to get the support of 39 of them. And if you're a minority group, you're not going to get that. And you know what? Even if you want to debate it, the fact that the debate is recorded and your vote is recorded on it, that could be quite uncomfortable if you're in the administration. So we want to shut that down.
It was one of the councillors highlighted a couple of weeks ago. I'm too scared to say anything in case I get the video clip. I don't know, something like that.
So listen, I'm awful glad that you have shown these things, because I haven't really been that political in the past, but you guys shown things that are actually happening in the chamber. It's a real eye opener. And
all we're trying to do, honestly, this goes to anybody at all listening to this show. We're trying to take this complex information and break it down into its bare bones and try to explain it in such a fashion where it's not too boring. But the next part is people get a better understanding on why decisions that are going against them and why they're being made in such a fashion, or for them, that really doesn't really matter. But here's the reason why that's happening. Does that answer your point, Cola?
It certainly does, yes.
Good man.
I've also got to say, I loved your wee skit about El Presidente.
An ode to Jim Loga. It did make it.
You're going to keep that going,
yes, I am. Once we get time, we're kind of pushed for time tonight, but I'll definitely be another ode for somebody else next week. But listen, Cola, thank you so much.
Brilliant.
For phoning
Thanks
in.
again.
Good stuff, guys. Keep on the good work.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
So there we go, Jerry. One of our first callers there.
Do you know, see when you hear callers talking about things that, and they're pointed things are like, you know, I didn't understand that's the way it worked. Yeah. And this is the nature of local politics. It's so complex. Yeah. And even as a councillor, and I like to councillor, and I'm in my third year now, I learn more about this this process every day. Okay, we'll shut it down.
Hello, welcome. What's the point? How are you doing, Cola?
I'm
That was your question for Jerry and I.
So I watched the debate last night.
Did you watch it through your fingers?
Not the interviews after it, to be honest with you.
Oh,
A wee bit of kind of background on myself. I watched some of the kind of live streams that the council does. It's a wee bit of...
so you like the pantomime? I was going to say you like the pantomime that exists within North Lanarkshire Council. Wow.
Exactly that. However, it doesn't get to me too much because I believe in kind of local people, their credibility, and I preserve a chance with it.
Yep.
But something that kind of did get to me last night is watching the interviews after the debate. I don't think I've seen a single candidate that I believe was competent at actually being an MSP.
Oh, that's a good point.
And I mean, educationally, how academic they might be to actually be able to present themselves as they can go to a debate, how they're going to be in Parliament, and how they're going to actually be running a country.
So I think there was one of the individuals was pushed on several occasions. I think that the point was being made. I think it was a Labour candidate, if it serves me right, where it was being pushed. How are you going to defend people if you can't even show up for a debate?
Yeah, I mean, we've had the I don't want to say the pleasure, but we had the opportunity to speak to one of the candidates, and hear Ross Lambie from the Reform UK party, and I had no doubt, and Greg, I know that you agree with this. I had no doubt that guy had what it took to go toe to toe with the SNP, and he did so last night. And Katie Loudon, to her credit, also appeared on national TV, and that must be a stressful set of circumstances for them. But those two candidates at least put themselves in front of the country, exposed themselves to scrutiny, and whether you agree one outdid the other or not isn't really relevant. But I think those two showed that they at least have the credentials, and I think I know what you're saying in terms of the interviews that took place after it. They seemed an awful lot more I don't want to say difficult, but it was challenging for them.
I don't know if I'm maybe comparing this wrong, and I hope this is kind of going to make sense to you, caller, as well. Perhaps it's me. Perhaps I'm looking at it differently. Perhaps that my observations are kind of put back into check, because when you look at that, to become an MSP, you're saying difficult and pressure, etc.
Oh,
you chose that. That's no thrust upon you. You're no getting tapped on the shoulder and getting told to stand in such a public by-election, and given the circumstances which led to it. The issue for me here is again, what kind of message is that sending out to normal working people? Because if you, let's say for talking's sake tomorrow, you were an elected member, you come from a housing background, Jerry, and you're applying for a job, a promotion within that job, then really in effect, if you've not got the skills or the capability or the quality or the credentials to go for that job, and you don't get that, then you have to kind of understand that's the reason why I never go there.
Absolutely.
Well, what's the difference in this? Is the credentials there for these candidates? Is it the same sort of idea? I get that people don't want establishment politics anywhere, but the reality has to be what gives them the position and the qualification to stand for these positions.
I tell you, it all comes down to the electorate. Now, you watch that. I don't know if you live in that particular constituency or not, right? But pretend that you did, okay? Would it have changed your mind about who you might have voted for? Was it like after watching it?
It would have changed my mind, but that's what really frustrated me. Is watching it. Obviously, I ended up on Google after it, googling an MSP salary.
It's not bad.
It's all right. It's not too shabby.
To speak about myself, I think I'm vastly experienced in my chosen field, educated to a high level, and worked hard to get there.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that the Labour guy in particular has a chance of getting a seat based on people just being lifelong Labour supporters rather than actually the value that he's going to bring.
Do you know, when we came into the studio tonight, that particular man was here, the candidate was here, and a very affable individual to meet. Like, if you were to meet him on the street, you'd think, what?
Sorry for him watching the interview. I just felt that he was at his depth, and I feel if I went for a job when I was at my depth, I wouldn't get it.
What's an MSP salary sitting at? Just out of curiosity, what it was sitting at an hour thing?
£74,500.
How much?
74,500
plus expenses.
And plus they're allowed to manage an office, I believe.
Yeah, so that's their expenses. So it's an additional $200,000, I think it is, in relation to expenses. I can't disagree with you, Collar. I really can't disagree with you. If it's a case that you're going to end up with £77,000, potentially £200,000 to operate an office with and employ staff and do everything else, surely you're coming with a degree of credibility.
Not to put you on the spot, Collar, but of the two individuals who did appear,
are you
Katie,
trying to justify your...
No, of the two who had the guts and gumption to appear on national TV, Katie Loudon, SNP, and Ross Lambie of Reform UK, who would you say came out on top?
I'm going to say that's the gritted taste, but the voice at home was better. I've been a lifelong nationalist.
There you go. Right.
And you know that is a very worrying.
Can you get an actual answer to a question, I'm going to think? So
that's concerning. Concerning. Well, listen, did we answer your question okay? You happy with that?
Yep.
We're going to move on now. Listen, thank you so much for keep listening and greatly appreciated. And that sounds good. 2 listeners now, Jerry. That's amazing.
Happy days.
Well, anyway, Jerry Brennan, let's shut that phone line down now, because I want to quickly catch on something as well. We've not done this in a couple of weeks now. Our political highlight of the week. And it does...
Did you not have a fanfare for that?
Well, I actually do, Jerry, and I'm going to try again and see whether or not we can get it. But in fact, you know what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to skip ahead, because I've actually got the video clips, Jerry.
Right.
I've got the video clips. So let's start with my political highlight of the week being... we cast our mind back to last night. We've talked about this quite a lot tonight.
All day, almost.
And to be perfectly honest, you and I were on the phone last night as we were watching that debate. And like you said, there was an individual within that, the two is, I think, even agreed this morning that had our hands in our face at that point. Now, for me, the political highlight was, and again, coming back to it, this might be a training issue or whatever it may be. It might be whatever, right? And it's easy to pick on aspects of politicians and things like that. But if you're go all over your brief before you stand for such a high office, given the fact of £74,000 plus expenses,
yes,
plus everything else, surely you should know exactly what your position's going to be on things.
Well,
yes.
Are you going to play some more?
I'm going to play some clips. I'll not say anything. Right, you don't say anything. This has had me in kinks, Jerry.
Right, go for it.
The subject matter is so serious, but it's the delivery. I'm going to try and see if I can play it now.
Are you worried about child poverty? That's something that's a big issue for the Scottish Parliament to deal with.
Yes. Child poverty is a scourge of this modern society.
Is that something? Child poverty? Yes. Child poverty, our society, etc. My goodness.
Do you know, it was only one of the questions that I think, and even in the debate itself, where there was the opportunity for each of the candidates who showed up to cross question each other. Now, when we had Ross on here, he almost mirrored what he spoke to us about when he spoke to Katie Loudon from the SNP, and yet it didn't appear that she was prepared for that. I think she'd probably worked on other things, but all those things that Ross mentioned to us about the German model of the NHS, about Wisher General, about his daughter and all of that, all Katie needed really to do was listen to her show, and she would have had the blueprint She would have had the blueprint
to North Lanarkshire politicians, especially SNP politicians, don't listen to your show, Jerry. I think.
I know. I
If you think that doesn't happen,
I think they do, but I think when you're under the lights and you're under that pressure, then some individuals will perform better than others. But my highlight of the week was similar to yours, right? And I kind of mentioned this earlier on, but it's the fact that politics has changed so much now. We talk about the debate.
Yeah.
We talk about that almost in every election, any sizable election that you have, either to Westminster or Holyrood, there's a debate.
Yeah.
That's a relatively new and American approach to politics. Prior to 2000,
to be hustling. So you used to have your politicians turning up to hustle as a local community centre.
Prior to 2010, that didn't happen at all. So that happened with Clegg and Brown and David Cameron sort of thing. And before that, it didn't really happen. So if you are prepared to put yourself up for public office as an MP or an MSP, you better brush up on your debating skills, and you better be ready to go under the lights, because if you don't, you won't be elected. And I think that's going to bear out in this election. I think those who showed up, I think it's going to be between both of them.
We're soon going to know why the election pendulum sort of flows by Thursday.
Who are you going for?
I think it's done. I think it's done, and the reason it's done is because the SNP's approach. There's always a telltale sign with the SNP, right? John Swinney, I've counted, there's been at that by-election 4 times.
Yep.
And Sunday they tried to muster about 100 people to be in Hamilton Town Square. If that does not tell you how scared the SNP are, how close they think that this is going to run, then you need to look under the bonnet to see what the engine mechanics is. And that there is a panic dash to try and get as much support out for Katie Loudon as possible. There's also another prevalent point in this, and I think from their perspective, the bogeyman approach to Farage, regardless of what his politics or anybody's belief is to it, the approach that they've taken in this by-election, it hasn't worked the way they thought it would work. And I think that potentially you might see a recheck and balance in relation to the SNP and how they approach reform moving forward.
I think there'll be tactical voting.
Yep.
I think the Unionist bloc do this really well.
Yep.
They do it on X, and I watched it at the Westminster election. There'll be Labour hemorrhaging votes to reform.
SNP will be hemorrhaging votes to reform.
There'll be some. Conservative will all jump to reform.
Yep.
And I think they'll pick up the scraps, and I think that they will do just enough to go over the line.
Do you think that SNP voters might be looking at reform as a protest vote in this election as well? Because ultimately, as I said again last night, that debate and that kind of thing, 9 months or 10 months is all the person's going to really have in position as an MSP. What real change can be made in 10 months before the Scottish Parliament elections come? But this is the big but that we keep coming back to all the time. Political landscape's changing. What is it going to look like?
And it's changing under their feet, and I think the SNP relied very heavily on, I don't want to say sympathy for the sad death of the previous MSP, and that was dreadfully sad, but the sands are shifting so quickly politically that you cannot rely on the good work of an incumbent to carry you through if they pass away through circumstances as sad as these were.
Well, you'll be glad to hear, Jerry, and those 2 guys that phoned in that seem to be listening to us, that we're coming to the end of the show now. So really, in effect, all we've got to do is say thanks to loads of people. Just a couple of quick checks as well. The podcast will be available on Thursday in all social media channels, including YouTube and TikTok, etc.
Yeah, like and share.
Like and share.
Like and share widely.
And if you don't like and share, at least comment and tell us how rubbish we are, because we're quite happy to accept any form of feedback.
Absolutely.
In addition to that as well, we will be back next Tuesday with a bit of a famous guest, Jerry, so that'll be interesting for us.
Looking forward to it, Greg, already.
As soon as
no, I don't.
This is available. Let's extend that invitation after the 12th, and let's see whether although he's available.
Absolutely.
To come on. But listen, this has been What's the Point. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, folks.
Always been Greg, and he's been Jerry, and we don't see you through the week. We'll see you through.
Have a good week. Cheers.
On to other parties. When they told us they wouldn't take part in the debate, We, in the interests of programme balance, offered the Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem and Green candidates individual interviews. The Green candidate declined, but the other three accepted. Here's the Scottish Labour candidate, Davy Russell. Davy Russell, you've been focused on chapping the doors. What time do you chap the doors at night until?
About 8:30.
So you could be in an STV studio at 10:30 then to do a debate?
Well, when you finish your door chapping for the day, usually 4 sessions I do. I've been processing the casework for that particular day, and I usually pick up a dozen items to do. But it was my decision.
You could be in the studio at 10:30 to do a debate with your other candidates in this by-election.
I took a conscious decision. It's not about me talking to the other candidates or the electorate. It's about listening as well. And in a debate, you can't listen. And that's been my strength, listening to the people who have been ignored for years.
So you're saying you couldn't listen if you were in a debate? You could listen to your opponents. You could maybe even consider holding them to account.
We have been listening to the opponents for years. The SNP have been in power for 18 years and they haven't done
But it looks like you're
electorate.
dodging debates. You haven't taken part in one single debate during this entire by-election. I've never seen the like.
Definitely not. It was a conscious
but
decision.
you are dodging them.
But
You're
I
not taking
took-
part in ours tonight. You're not taking part in community debates. You're dodging the debates.
I took a conscious decision to make this a back to basics campaign where I was listening as much as I was talking.